Welcome to Gold Derby's Making of Inside Out 2 panel. I'm David Buchanan, joined today by Kelsey Mann, director, Mark Nielsen, producer, Meg LeFauve and Dave Holstein, screenwriters, Andrea Datzman, composer, and Pete Docter, executive producer and chief creative officer. Pete, I want to start with a question for you. Obviously, you've been with Pixar for a very long time. I wanted to ask, what is most unique about the experience of making Inside Out 2 compared to everything else, all of the wonderful and remarkable films you've done with Pixar?
What's unique about it? Well, I mean, first of all, Inside Out 1 was the most fun I had as a director. I mean, the cast is fantastic. The music is fantastic. Everything about it was just, I mean, it wasn't easy, but it was a lot of fun working with Meg. And so, bringing those characters into the next phase was just what, I mean, Meg, you can talk about this too. It's just a lot of fun finding different facets of characters that we thought we knew, and then digging deeper and finding more about them, getting Joy to be angry, for example, or the vulnerable sides of anger. And it was a great chance to really dig deeper.
Yeah, and I want to ask you and Meg, pull you in, because you're obviously both screenwriters on the first film. Were there moments when you were plotting that, breaking that, rewriting that, where you had ideas that said, maybe they're not right for this film, we're going to hold them in our back pocket, or is the scope too big? Like, how early did you kind of have kernels of ideas for expanding the universe of Inside Out?
No, I think we were just like, man, if we make it through this, it's going to be amazing.
That's what I was going to say. We were working so hard just to make that movie happen. Of course, we made jokes about Puberty Alarm when we realized we were going to put it there, that, oh, that would be funny. But no, honestly, I mean, there's some emotions that were in the first that got cut that tried to make their way back, like Schadenfreude. He still got cut.
Yes,
but no, we were
for the second time.
We were just trying to get it done.
Yeah. Well, and we had talked about nostalgia a little bit, didn't we?
I think so, a little bit.
So there were one or two things. Were there other things that I can't remember, like scenes? I think Kelsey, you and your team came up with a lot of new stuff that we hadn't really even conceived of in the first one.
Yeah, but you guys did so much work. I didn't realize, like, I knew it was difficult. I was at the studio working on another film, so I went to all the screenings. But when I first got on the film, I went into the archives. I watched every single screening. And I went into the art folder and looked at all of the production design that had been done for the film, and it was incredible. I want to say it was like a record-setting amount of work that had been explored. It's such a fun world to play in, but when
like
you go into the mind, it
record
can be
setting,
anything.
like that's aspirational for me.
Yeah.
It's going to be embarrassing, but I like the aspirational side of it.
Yeah, it's true. But it can be anything, like when you go into the mind, you're like, what does a memory look like? What does a belief look like? It can be anything, and that's exciting, but it's also incredibly daunting because you're trying to find something to hook. We all have memories, and we all have beliefs, and we all have a feeling for them, but we have zero visual vocabulary for them. So it's exciting, but it's also like the hardest thing on this movie was to design that sense of self. I can't tell you when you guys remember this, Mark, you remember when we finaled that, the applause that we had in the room of like, we finally finaled this thing. And it was like near the end. It took so many years. And it was so great to go through the archives on the first film because there's so many great ideas that are out there, and including on this film too. There's so many fun ideas that made it obviously into the film, but there's so many ideas that I'm like, gosh, I wish this could see the light of day someday.
But I mean, that was the whole point of making the film was that it wasn't photoreal. It wasn't things we could just go and say, all right, see what a bug looks like, I'll make that. We had to really use our not just imagination, but like feel into it. You could kind of tell when you look at the design, like, yeah, that doesn't feel right.
And the production design too is so tied to the story and what the story's going to do. I know Ralph Eggleston was kind of drove himself crazy on the first film because the story kept changing because we're iterating and changing it all the time, and that massively impacts like what even needs to be designed for the world.
Yeah, we'd walk by his office and like, yep, he's crying again. We changed it and we broke him again. No, he was fantastic, obviously, and just amazing production designer. I'm so fortunate to get to work with him.
Yeah, and he worked on this film too. He was with us at the beginning of this film.
That's
We
true.
love Ralph.
Mark, you were on the first film as well. I wanted to ask you, how do you know not just that you have the right plot for a sequel? Obviously, that's very tricky to, and I know, everybody here was involved with making sure the story was right and honing the story. But also, how do you know when the time is right to bring a sequel into the world? Do you have a sense of like what the mood is at the company, what the mood is kind of in the world that feels like this is the right moment to make Inside Out 2?
Yeah, I mean, you get a sense of it just in your outside life, just talking to people out there in the world. And I can't tell you how many people approached me in that 9-year period between the first one and the second one to ask for a sequel to Inside Out. It really connected and really hit people in the heart, and they learned about sadness, something they never really thought of before. And so you kind of get a feel for whether it's going to be desired out there in the world by just talking to people out there. So, after the first one, we had no intention to go in and do a sequel. Again, we were just trying to get it right and trying to make a meaningful film. But over time, enough people were approaching us that I think even you, Pete, were like, yeah, maybe we should start thinking about this because there seems to be a real desire for it.
Yeah, Kelsey, you had just mentioned earlier too, taking ideas from the first film just to inform maybe visually what you wanted to do with the second, honing these story ideas. And you obviously inherited such a wonderful kind of visual universe from Pete, who directed the first film. What was most exciting and most challenging for you to expand on? Obviously, like you said, the belief system, the sense of self is kind of the hallmark of the second film. Were there other things that you were most excited to say, hey, I can kind of do whatever I want in this universe of the mind. We're going to create new spaces, new ideas. What was most exciting for you to get to do?
I mean, a lot of that was going to new places. I wanted to open up new doors in the world that I didn't even know were there. When I first started, I made a list of all my favorite sequels, and I made a list of sequels that I didn't think were as successful. And I kind of stood back and I go, okay, why do I like these and why do I not like these? And there was a sense of like newness and being original that the ones I thought were successful, and I noticed the ones that I didn't like as much just repeated the last kind of film. They're like, hey, that worked. Let's just run that play again, and it's a fine balance because you gotta give the audience kind of what it hopes and expects when they come to an Inside Out film or any sequel. But then if you just give them that, they're going to walk away going, that was okay. You have to give them something new. And so I got some advice pretty early on, which was the sooner you start thinking of this film as an original, the better off you're going to be. And that really rung true to my favorite sequels. They always kind of explored. I mean, Pete even kind of talked about it at the beginning, even within the characters themselves, seeing new sides of them, seeing Joy like lose it in the middle of Act 2 and she gets really angry. One, we just thought that would be fun to hear Amy Poehler lose it. We just thought that would be entertaining record. But it's fun to see a new side of her. She's kind of an optimistic leader of the group. And it's kind of reflects a lot of us here being leaders. And, it's hard to stay optimistic,
I never saw Kelsey lose it, though.
Yeah,
you?
exactly.
One time I saw him, but I'm not going to talk about it.
That's for the post session after that.
I think it was so helpful that the engine of this thing being Riley, to have Riley age a couple years, I think really trickled down everywhere, helping us use that theme of change and growth to infuse in the second film what Kelsey was looking for. How do you mature the story? How do you find new rooms in the mind that are next chapters, from the previous film? I think all of that was sort of my North Star. I know, looking for how to find a different story for Joy, an emotional through line. All of that sort of came from just this idea of puberty means change, and how do you approach that comically, but also emotionally?
Yeah, I want to stick with you, Dave, and ask, I had heard in one of the interviews you've already done with my colleague, Chris Rosen, which were all wonderful. Somebody had mentioned that hockey did not at first play a major role in the kind of idea for the sequel. But obviously, it became such a helpful and brilliant kind of structure to tell the story about these new emotions that Riley is feeling. What for you and Meg really stood out about using this, kind of 3-day sleepaway camp, something that Riley's passionate about, as a kind of backdrop and anchor for this story about what's going on in her mind?
Well, I mean, as someone who literally lives with anxiety over his shoulder at all times, I can tell you that I think for me it was trying to identify this for what stakes mean to a 13-year-old, and I think I really tapped into what the story was when I think Kelsey and I were discussing, this idea that, like, how can a 3-day hockey camp mean the rest of someone's life? How can the stakes of something so small, but through a teenage, point of view, have the stakes of something far more dangerous and physical?
It was also important too, because we tried a lot of things for Riley to do, a talent show, and we explored different facets of her because we thought that might be interesting at first, Kelsey and I, but we realized that, we needed to isolate her too, right, Kelsey? We needed to take her away from her parents. She doesn't have that to go back to. All the stuff that normally would be done on phones, right, is now being done face to face, because we even had a scene early on where she had to give her, like, literally, like, hand your phone over, and how hard that was, just to really make it much more active and present for her in those 3 days, to do, as Dave said, really make it feel so important, the way it does when you're a kid and a teenager or an adult on an interview at the moment. The anxiety starts to go up, and you're like, this could be the rest of my life. So that was
Plus, you can tell by looking at us, we're all super athletic, sport kind of folks. It's just second nature to.
Hockey was my fallback. Yeah.
Right.
It's honestly a big part of this age. I've done a lot of research. I mean, that's where I started, is with the research of what goes on in our brains when we're teenagers. And one of the first drawings I ever did, it's in the movie. It's a joke of the giant friendship island and a tiny family island. And everybody laughed at it, and because it feels so true. And then I did the research of what happens. Now I know why. At this age, your peers are suddenly incredibly important. Not just friends. Friends are important, but also just peers in general. You care so much about what other people think of you, especially at that age. Other people your age, and you're going from being taken care of to learning how to take care of yourself. And so you push away, your caregivers. That's why, my daughter finds me incredibly embarrassing and wants me to drop her off, a block from high school. There's a reason for it. I used to go like, why is this happening? Why won't you just give me a hug before you get out of the car? But now I understand why. They're trying to fit in. I think that you become incredibly self-conscious, and you start to think, how do I fit in? What is everyone thinking of me? It's because we're social creatures that need each other for survival. And so we wanted to put her in a scenario in which it's nothing but her peers. And we're like, where is that? We did a lock-in. Remember that, Meg? We did a lock-in at one point, an overnight lock-in, but we found we had to keep telling people what a lock-in was. So
we were also doing that to Joy. Her social situation is completely changing immediately, right? So she also is in that same kind of flux that Riley is.
It's what Dave's talking about, change. It's going through change. She needs to go to somewhere new, somewhere uncomfortable, somewhere where she doesn't know anyone, or she has her friends there, but then we're breaking that up because she's caught between two social groups. I remember doing that to my friends. Yeah, I remember acting awful to a very good friend of mine because I was trying to impress somebody else, because I'm trying. All you care about is just being accepted. You just want to get love and acceptance from other people, and you'll change who you are in order to gain that acceptance, which is what anxiety's kind of goal is throughout Act 2. And it's all built around the way we are at that age.
There was another great sensibility that I thought was brought to it, which immediately prepares the audience for this being change, which is just in engaging hockey right away. you get into this physical sense that is different. I mean, when you're talking about being in the mind, you're not so much in the body, but immediately you have Riley, arms flailing and them at the control board witnessing and feeling that, and her almost crashing into people. I feel like across the board, there's a lot of physical sense to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to stick with you, Andrea, and ask, obviously, we've been talking about maybe some of the earlier iterations, how the plot of this film took shape in its final form. How early are you brought in to start working on the music? And how much do you need to know or even see? Like, do you need storyboards to start composing? Do you need, emotions, plot lines? How much do you need to know and see to really feel like it's the right time to start composing?
Everything is helpful right away, but especially the visuals, because you get a sense of the energy right away, of the pacing. I was brought in, I think my first meeting was in May, I think, to start seeing some of it, but I really started in earnest in September. And then in increasing speeds. But
more record breaking. Sorry, Andrea.
Yeah, let's do this. I didn't know you were so competitive, Kelsey.
Oh my goodness.
But I like getting the opportunity to create a theme and throw it out if it's not the right one. But create a theme and try it in all its different ways. Try it in its angry version, try it in its disgusted version, and in every style, so you sort of get to explore all the corners of it and what it can do and what it can't do. And so I got a great opportunity within this structure to do that also, and try out some things that in the same way that there are emotions that didn't make it to the that hit the cutting room floor. There are theme portions that also did in all these different versions. But it is also great to not have, I shouldn't say this, to not have so much time to overthink it too. But that's why it's great to have that capsule time to really explore, because then when you hit the ground running, you're just going, because the best time is when you're in the play mode with the people that you're creating with, instead of sitting here in this bubble on your own, I hope they like this, but getting to play something and see whether it works or not, really, and see whether it invokes the direction that you really would like.
One of my favorite things of the original film and the sequel in particular is just the brilliant wordplay. I mean, not only is the film so witty, but then you take these kind of well-worn ideas or tropes that we have about our brains and visualize them in such brilliant and exciting ways. Sarcasm, brainstorm, stream of consciousness. I mean, it's just so gloriously smart. I just wanted to ask each of you, do you have a favorite one of those kind of, pun moments, whether you had a direct hand in creating it or when you saw it on the page, you said, I can't wait to see, how we bring that to life on screen? Anybody want to go first?
Well, one of my favorites got cut, which is I loved Procrastination Land, maybe because I lived there a lot, but it was so fun. It didn't ultimately stay because it didn't affect the other two storylines in the way that we needed them to, I think. But watching Anger sit and watch television and refuse to move was just my
I love that land so much. And it's such a teenage land too. The hard part was connecting it to anxiety, because procrastination is all about stopping and not doing anything, and anxiety is all about like go, 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 go. We're like, how do we get this in the story? But I had another one that's cut that I think is really fun. It was fishing for ideas.
Yeah.
I always liked that term, and so we had them going on boats, literally fishing for ideas, and we had a whole environment that existed with this place. I think it's such a fun idea. Again, we had trouble getting it into the movie, fitting it into the story.
And speaking of cut puns, I think there was the puberty park sequence that got cut. I think was just like a wealth of puberty theme park rides that were all very, very, very funny.
See, that's
My
the rule.
favorite.
If something's too good, it has to get cut.
Has to go.
That's the rule.
Yeah.
My
You know what's
favorite's
great
probably
about-
from
you know.
my favorite's probably from the first film where they're riding the train and these boxes of little things
I love it.
dump out and they're like, oh no, these facts and opinions look so similar, and they're just like, doesn't matter, just throw it all in the one box.
That got cut too in the second one. We went to where they made facts and opinions.
Oh
That was-
yeah, is that right?
Oh, that's
I don't
funny.
think I
Yeah,
even
we
saw
did.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. That lasted for one sequence, and we were like, no, that doesn't work.
And in the early days, we had the impulsives also, right?
Oh, yeah,
Being
that
a
was cool.
teenager, being impulsive is such a big part of it. So we played those out kind of as characters in a scene that didn't make it
Little
through. but-
gremlins. Weren't they little
You-
gremlins? that-
Yeah, they were.
Yeah. I still think that's a good idea too.
So my puns are a little more behind the scenes, but I love like when I get to see all these versions, and I forgot that Facts and Opinions wasn't in the first. Like that's in my forever.
Oh yeah.
But my cue titles
Are the
Um,
best.
Oh,
Are
yeah.
the
funny
best.
too.
Oh my gosh, I don't have your book here, otherwise I'd read them out. There's so many good ones. Which ones do you remember?
Well, I just pulled it up real quick.
Oh, you have it.
That's my brain at this point. But I did a little bit of an Easter egg within here. I don't think I've mentioned because I love neuropsychology too, but I put within the cue titles, because we're talking about anxiety, within the cue titles, you've got fight, flight, freeze, and fawn.
Mhm.
All
No
within
way,
those.
really?
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
shout out to those. Life of Riley. It's good.
Oh yeah.
Good one.
Yeah.
But let's see. Pride and Prejudice for when that first scene riding to
The
to
camp.
hockey camp.
Yeah.
I'm
let's see
partial
here.
to inside outro and outside intro.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
And
that goes way back, those titles. We were always like, yeah, we want to hear the music, but what's the title? What's the title?
good.
Yeah.
One that didn't hit it was, or didn't make this one, was Emotional Scroller Coaster, which that would be end credits. But we got
That's awesome.
we got
Nice.
Done Track Mind instead for that.
Yes.
Let's see here. Yeah. Red Herring.
Oh, that's
Oh, when the red
Yeah.
hair. Yeah.
that's
That's a
great.
good one.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
good one.
Man. Yeah, the
Uh,
title of that sequence was Turning Red. Which
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's
so
right.
fun. Yeah.
So lots of good ones. That's something that among my my music editor and I and my orchestrator and I, we love to throw that up and say, all right, who gets the best one? All right.
Pete and Mark want to ask a question to both of you about just how successful the film has been. I mean, as a kind of creative endeavor, incredibly clever and so terrific, but also just the response you've had between the box office, the response from audiences. What do you attribute? It's hard to pinpoint, but what do you attribute the huge success of the film to? And how much of it do you think is how well the film speaks to mental health? I mean, it's so kind of sophisticated in its approach, but also accessible to audiences of all ages. So how can you kind of, if you had to replicate the brilliant success of this film, what are the kind of key ingredients for this one that just let it, take off into the stratosphere? Pete?
Yeah, the film did okay, at the box office. It's our number one film at Pixar and in the world, actually, the highest grossing animated film of all time, which is crazy. I would have never expected that. I would say it's interesting, although we did a ton of research to try to make it as based on factual information as we could. We were also wanting to make sure this is not a lesson, that it's not a go to school and eat your vegetables. It's supposed to be fun. So I think the success is probably in that it reflects us, that everything on screen, we identify with those feelings and that experience. And I think that's probably almost more important. I mean, that's what the research got us to as well, is whenever you can identify those truisms.
Yeah.
Mark, you have
Yeah, I'd like to think anxiety. I do think that's something that, we didn't talk about when I was a kid very much, but it's very much something people are talking about now and trying to sort through. And the responses I've gotten from people, friends and family that have talked to me about it, that's what stuck out to them and made them want to go back and see it again, is kind of how we treat anxiety, and thinking about that differently, and seeing the side of it that's there to help you, but seeing the side of it that can really take over, and kind of even some thoughts on get to see Riley try to manage her way through it. And I think there was a big impact on people in just thinking about themselves and how they deal with anxiety. But again, could be a real stressful film to watch if it's not fun and entertaining. So we're always trying to strike that balance.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I want to ask Meg and Dave about crafting anxiety as a character, because I think what's so important is that while maybe she does some things that are antagonistic, she's not a villain and not really the antagonist of the film, which is so important, especially as you're trying to talk to younger audiences about mental health and what they're feeling. How tricky was it to create a character like anxiety that, you know, has maybe some role to play in, you know, the arc of the film, in terms of maybe doing things that, you know, are not in Riley's best interest, but always wanting to do what's right for Riley and help Riley? It seems like a very tricky dynamic to navigate.
It was, and when we started, and Kelsey can speak to this too, but when we started, we did kind of lean into her being an antagonist at first. You know, I think definitely when you're trying to be authentic to yourself, some part of you thinks, yeah, get rid of my anxiety. She's awful. She ruins my life. So it feels antagonistic. So we did explore that at first. I mean, she was always cute, but she kind of came in cloaked and pretending, and when she had a whole evil plan, and she started to really go arch. And that's when we kind of all regrouped and we're like, you know, she is trying to do what she thinks is best. She does love Riley, and we have to keep that kind of at the center of her character, that her goal is good. Her goal is to help Riley. Your anxiety is not there to ruin your life. It's actually trying to help you. And so part of it is just saying thank you, and accepting that it's there is often a first step. But her plan is what is wrong. Her plan, she has a terrible plan of how she's going to help Riley. So it was always trying to find that balance with her.
I was always I did a pass at one point where I tried to think about anxiety as Christopher Nolan's assistant on Interstellar, and Joy was Christopher Nolan, and anxiety was a huge fan of Christopher Nolan, and just really could not be more excited to be helping Christopher Nolan make this amazing movie. But she had some notes, you know, and she started to think maybe she could direct the film a little bit better than Christopher Nolan could. And then, you know, so then she puts Christopher Nolan in a bottle. And then, you know, tries really hard to direct the film, but it's really hard to direct Interstellar. There's a lot of moving parts. And, you know, and then like by the end, she just kind of, you know, just kind of goes nuts.
Dave, I can't tell if you're trying to get a job with Christopher Nolan or you hate Christopher.
Yeah.
He's the intern, Pete.
Mostly,
he's the intern in the story. This is what actually happened.
It was the intern who took it too far and then realized that they couldn't quite. They had to hand the reins back. But that's anyway. My email address is Christopher Nolan fan. FA.
You know, it's an incredibly complex thing to write, because you have 3 different worlds with all different rules, and they all have to impact each other. And it's still Joy's story, even though anxiety is definitely driving a lot of that plan. Joy has to constantly be countering, and then that has to affect Riley. So from a writing standpoint, to do a sequel, make it better, and do it on 3.5 levels in terms of storytelling, it was just, honestly, I don't even know how it happened. It's one of those beautiful things that when you look at it now, you're like, of course. But yeah, at the time, it was not.
That was a balancing act I was seeking to strike also, where you've got what Riley is experiencing out in the world, and really trying to not sonically paint anxiety as a villain, because you can do so quickly with the wrong music. Bum, bum, bum. Or really, there were some extremely tender scenes, like early morning Riley and Val playing together, that's where you feel like, oh, look, maybe anxiety and envy have it together. Maybe they've got this. But those scenes really, they took a few passes for me, but they felt the most authentic because that's how it lives in its everyday, and sort of makes its keep too within ourselves as well. It's like, oh, that worked out for me. I should listen to that more often.
Should talk about, I loved your like the alarm kind of sensor thing that you're doing, the tap 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 thing. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your kind of thoughts on that. I thought that was great.
Yeah, I mean, because anxiety has so many different ways of convincing us to listen, but that was something that I built into the theme, was this variable sense of alarm that it's just with you all the time. It's like, hey, hey, hey. And so this, the way that it's got the structure of a zing, get your attention. Hey, what, listen to me. And then da 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 da. And I can vary that rhythm throughout. And I did. I turned it into a sort of a march. Bum 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 ba da, or ba da 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 da. And I think about the way that it's, how is it for me right now? I'd say it's just sort of a steady but getting your attention in that sense and creating a sense of pacing as well. So like in that scene that I just mentioned with Val and Riley, there, it's slow. Bum, ba, da. It's got sort of like a nice rhythm behind it where you do feel like it's a different skating scene than Joy had with Riley there.
Yeah, before I let you all go, I want to ask two emotion-based questions since the film is all about emotion. One is, what would you say is the predominant emotion while you're making the film? This is a making of. If you could pick some of the emotions from the film or emotions not in the film. And then two, the emotion of seeing, as we talked about earlier a little bit, the response to the film out in the world, whether you hear it from your own kids, if you have kids, on what they thought of it, the impact it had, or even folks that you don't know who come up to you to talk about the impact of the film. What are the kind of different emotional registers while you're making the film, and then when you get to just hear the overwhelming response to it? Let's start with you, Kelsey.
With me, oh boy, it's funny looking back on it. I'm like, oh, I put what I went through up on the screen. It's a battle between Riley's joy and anxiety, and that was the journey of making this movie. Because talk about having utter joy. I never thought I'd ever be able to direct a movie here at Pixar, and to be able to do that. If I could go back and tell my 10-year-old self that I get this opportunity, you feel nothing but joy for it. And I tried to hold on to that because I knew that kid could make a really good movie versus the person feeling the immense pressure and felt a lot of anxiety. If I had my anxiety at my console driving, the movie won't work. And it'll only work if I'm trying to make sure I have joy at my console as much as possible. So looking back on it, I'm like, wow, I put through what I was going through kind of up on the screen. I didn't really quite realize it, but I mean, in part I did a little bit because Pete's right. We just talk about what we're feeling and what we're going through as people. And I've learned to be incredibly vulnerable in the story room whenever we're talking about the movie. And I think that's one of the keys to Pixar's success, is that you're able to do that with everyone. And it's working when people are nodding in the room and saying, I know what you're talking about. And it works really well when people say, I know what you're talking about. And I've always thought I was the only one who thought that. And I think that leans over into the impact on the film. When I was a kid, I'm a huge fan of the Muppets and Jim Henson. And I remember reading a biography, and there was a quote by Jim where he said, my hope is to be one of those people that leaves the world a little bit better for me having been there. And even when I was a little kid, I was like, I want to do that with my life. You know, I want to make fun movies like Pete was talking about. I want to entertain. I want people to watch, you know, the movie over and over again because those are my favorite movies. But ultimately, I want to make a meaningful impact on people's lives. And I think that's, you know, there's a success of the film in terms of box office, and that's been incredible. But the part I really, really, really feel are all those little stories that you're talking about. I've never had this happen on anything I've ever worked on in my entire life. I can't tell you how many emails I've received, messages through Instagram, LinkedIn, physical letters. It's continuous. The impact, it's kind of what Pete was talking about, like, you know, why he felt it was time to tell another story. The impact of the first film was so massive, and we really wanted to do that with this movie and deal with like more complex emotions, and we really wanted to expand that vocabulary for kids and for adults, and it's had such an impact. I've had so many people come up and tear up and tell me how much this movie has meant to them, either for themselves or for their kids. You know, the first film was so much about giving kids a visual vocabulary, and even a vocabulary of how to speak about their emotions. But this film actually had a surprising effect where parents could actually understand their kids better. You know, I'm gonna get a little emotional talking about it, but I have a lot of people tell me how much it's brought them together as a family, and it is in ways that we always hope for it. How many times do we talk about this, you guys, and we hope there would be that? And it's beyond anything I could have ever have hoped for. So I feel nothing but grateful for this film and for everybody on this panel here and everyone that was a part of this movie.
Well said.
I was looking at Dacher Keltner's list of 27 emotions, and I was thinking, is it confusion, excitement? I think where I settled was empathic pain.
Oh,
That's what I was
Wait,
feeling.
It's pretty good.
that's
Wow,
pretty
I
awesome.
feel like you just described every Pixar movie that we made.
I had just incredible anxiety. We were also in the middle of COVID, so anxiety was everywhere. And we had direct access to it, and any person that we talked to on Zoom. But I did find though, and this was really helpful for me. You know, when your anxiety and that pressure just, you know, because you really want to make a better sequel, you really want to honor the first movie by surpassing it in some way and go deeper. And like Kelsey said, be authentic and touch people and have fun. There were so many balls in the air. There were so many balls in the air but at some point, ennui just walks in and goes, fuck it. Excuse my language, but you know, just write it. Just write it. Like you get to this peak and then you really need ennui to go, whatever, just write it. Just let it suck. And I found that was really helpful for me to let ennui take over every once in a while and just, it doesn't matter. Just have fun. Just let it go. Just write whatever. It's going to be okay. And it was because of all these amazing people on this call and so many others. And then in terms of it going out into the world, I'm 100% with Kelsey. So honored that the box office did what it's did, but the deep honor is how it's impacting people. I had somebody just the other day email me that she was listening to a podcast in Iran, and it was two men talking about how important the movie was to see so that you understood what was happening to your daughters and wives and that they had never thought about it. You know, so that's like an extreme version to my friend who didn't know that her daughter had anxiety until her daughter in the middle of the movie said, I feel like that all the time. You know, so it can be this, it's having this ripple out into the world, but it's also such an intimate, like Kelsey said, family, person to person experience. So what an incredible honor to have been part of that.
That is why this has been so important to me, but also why giving that emotional language to discuss with family, but creating that for people at a young age. And I didn't have that emotional language as a kid, but I had musical language. I didn't know how to tell people how intensely I felt about, man, 7th grade was rough. And I poured it out on the keys. So we're not going to have artists anymore because we're all going to be able to talk about it. This movie cured art, you guys. But it takes that sort of, for me, it took that sort of emotional blindness in a certain way, because I didn't have that language as a kid. I couldn't, when I got too in touch with exactly what emotion I was feeling on this, I would overthink it. I had all these different versions of anxiety that had so many different notes, but in going back and embracing a sense of play, or what does that feel like in my body without trying to identify it, I was able to sort of reverse engineer it into a feeling sense, and get into that blindness of what does it just feel like to feel like what's going on right now. And it helped that there was a great sense of responsibility and pressure on this. So of course there was natural anxiety, but it was also extremely cathartic for me, because tapping into that 13-year-old version of me had a lot to say.
Mark, Dave?
Yeah, you know, at one point or another, I think I felt all 27 of the emotions that were on Dacker's list. But right now, I'm just feeling a lot of nostalgia. You guys remember when we made Inside Out 2 together?
Yeah.
But no,
those were the days.
Those were the days. I just appreciate the crew so much. You know, Pixar is just full of people that are like at the top of their game in every category. And to see them rally on this film, they loved the first film so much. Every one of them, especially leadership that came onto the show, came on because of how they were impacted by the first one. And they're like, I want to be part of making something that made me feel the way that I did when I saw the first one. So it was a crew full of people just bringing absolutely everything they had to the project. And I just love that and appreciate that so much about this team. And I think that really made its way onto the screen.
Dave?
You know, there are obviously so many good emotions, and it's so hard to choose just one. So I'll think about it for a little bit. But if there was one in particular, you know, it's funny. I feel like I went on this arc over making this movie from anxiety to joy. You know, and there's nothing about the sort of like anxiety's ability to crush coal into diamonds, you know, and I think that there are those lessons, but the joy, just to jump on what Kelsey was saying and emoting, is that, you know, there are a lot of films you're going to watch this year, and they're beautiful films, and you will leave the credits just in awe of the craftsmanship and the filmmaking. There are not a lot of films that change the way you see the world and change the way you live. You know, and I think that the emotional language that it's given us to talk to kids, obviously on a psychologist level, but just frankly on how you view the world through your own core memories, through your own belief systems, through the visual language that this film allows you to see yourself in, I think is so special and doesn't go away. It stays with you, you know, forever.
Congratulations to all of you on the beautiful Inside Out 2. Thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank
Thanks for having us.
You.
It was fun.
We appreciate it.